But nonetheless, yes, non-believers include some of the most important contributors to human history. There is a pantheon of great thinkers and artists and poets, from the Greeks through the Middle Ages, through the Enlightenment to the present. The founders of the American Republic, Jefferson and Thoreau and Franklin, who came from Philadelphia, the great city of sisterly love, brotherly love and sisterly love. In any case, I say to each and every one of you that religious dissent in a democratic society such as America is a precious right. We have that right, and we ought not to be fearful of expressing it. I've expressed it in thousands of classes to thousands of students over the years, and someone responded, "Of course, you had tenure, you didn't have to worry." But nonetheless, I think that we ought to have the courage of our convictions, and that we are, and not feel embarrassed about this. We have doubts, honest doubts, and it's supported by science, and we ought to be willing to express that. So at this convention here in Philadelphia, the city of sisterly love, I can say that? Yes, you are keeping the torch alive in doing that. Well, now, what are some of the values that we defend? I said that we hold a series of values. Well, the first value, as I alluded to, is the preciousness and dignity of each individual person. That's our starting point, including ourselves. Some people hate themselves, the self-hatred, but you ought to consider yourself and any other person as a person entitled to equal consideration. And you ought to consider other people in the same way. And our effort should be to improve life for ourselves, our children, our relatives, our friends, our society, and the world community. And that is a noble moral principle that we ought to be prepared to defend. Now, I have introduced the term neo-humanism. In my writings, I wrote a statement on neo-humanism, got picked up in the New York Times and other places. Neo-humanists, namely atheists or non-believers, but not simply that, often feel that they're beleaguered, it depends on the community you live in, by the religious forces in society. I've seen a really basic transformation in America in the last 50 years, where now it is possible to express your point of view. Someone is a Methodist, or a Jew, or a Roman Catholic, or a humanist. Different points of view, equal to respect. I think that humanists ought to aspire to be more inclusive, that we should not feel beleaguered in American society. Surely this is not the case in Europe. Anyone in France, I know very well, or in Germany, or in England, or Eastern Europe, or is willing to express a point of view without fear about their religious beliefs and repercussions. We ought to make it clear that we are skeptical of institutional theism. And isn't that the case? The Protestants disagree with the Catholics, who disagree with the Jews, who disagree with the Hindus, and there are 200 Protestant denominations, so that is a fact. What we ought to focus on is not what we're against, but what we're for. we ought to make it clear that we have a positive agenda. This includes our emphasis upon critical thinking, the demand for reasons and evidence, to evaluate claims for knowledge. Someone says, I believe this. You say, why? And willingness to engage, depending on the social conditions, and debate and dialogue openly without fear. We need to apply the same critical examination of beliefs if they conflict with science, if there's no evidential basis for them, if they're contradictory. We ought to apply that same method to ethics and value. And values should be open to dispute and disagreement. Why do you cherish that? Why is that so crucial? And people are capable of changing their values, especially if you get in a situation where you marry somebody from two different traditions. My wife is French, I'm American, and that was the learning experience on both sides. And I found out I better give in if I don't want to get in trouble. But she gives it as well, we both do. And all of you know that to be true. So that the values that we cherish, and make them clear, the first value is the well-being, the health, the realization, the fulfillment of human life, the ending of suffering and pain, and the doing what we can to enhance the standard of living and the conditions of life itself. We emphasize reason in harmony with emotion, quality, and excellence. I often say that I believe every individual has an opportunity to fulfill his or her own desires, passions, interests, and values. Nonetheless, we should seek excellence. And when you encounter students, as I've had thousands, we want a student or a person or a relative or your child to lead an excellent life in his or her own terms. We emphasize the need for moral growth. Those of you who've had children, watch them, and the 2 or 3 or 4 future humanists running through here, you watch them develop each stage and you cultivate them, and each one is different. They're all persons in their own terms. The brother wants something, the sister does not. And so you recognize that and recognize individuality. That's the beauty of human life. So human growth is important. But what we need to do is develop empathy and actualization. The humanist movement has failed abysmally on this point. In the last 50 years, we argued for liberation from religion, emancipation from the chains that bind us, break away from religious strictures that are irrational and that repress so many people.